So I'm incredibly excited to be here today to introduce Kevin Kwan, the international best-selling author of Crazy Rich Asians and China Rich Girlfriend, the first two of an intended 3 novels about the schemers and dreamers in Asia's upper crust. So my friends and I were obsessed with the ridiculously titled Crazy Rich Asians when we visited Singapore back in 2013. And we would just run around Asia quoting the book, even though we were all not so rich Asians. And we went wild when Kevin released the sequel earlier this year. And I would say that's the great thing about the book and the strength of Kevin's writing. It doesn't matter if you weren't raised in Asia or you didn't grow up with Thai lady maids. The writing just sucks you in, and it paints such a vivid picture of the lifestyle and his characters' mindsets. Which also explains why he's been featured in Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, among other media sources, and that there's now a movie version in the works by the same producers of Hunger Games. So with that said, please join me in giving a warm Google welcome to Kevin Kwan, who will be doing a reading from his book, after which we will proceed to Q&A session, then take questions from the audience. Okay, clap.
Hey, thanks for coming here today on your lunch break or whatever. It's just so amazing to be at Google, you know, the company that we use every second of our lives, basically. So it's really a thrill to be here and to see such a great turnout to come see me read from my book. So I guess I should just start with doing a brief reading.
Yes.
I just thought I'd just kickstart things to get the juices flowing.
China Rich Girlfriend.
And I'm going to read from China Rich Girlfriend, my new novel, which is the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians. And I'm reading a chapter I've never read before live. So if I stumble, if I trip and fall, you know why. London, 8th of September, 2012, 9 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. A red Ferrari 458 Italia crashed through the window of the Jimmy Choo shoe boutique on Sloane Street sometime between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. last night. No one witnessed the incident. Metropolitan Police reported that 2 passengers were taken to St. Mary's, Paddington, where they are being treated for serious but non-critical injuries. The vehicle's owner's name was not released, pending further investigation. Sarah Lyer, The London Chronicle. Beijing Capital International Airport, September 9th, 2012, 7:45 p.m. Wait a minute, I'm in first class. Take me to first class, Addison Cheng said contemptuously to the flight attendant escorting him to his seat. This is first class, Mr. Cheng, the man in the crispy navy uniform informed him. But where are the cabins? Eddie asked, still confused. Mr. Cheng, I'm afraid British Airways does not have private cabins in first class. But if you'll allow me to show you some of the special features of your seat. No, that's fine. Eddie tossed his ostrich leather briefcase onto the seat like a petulant schoolboy. Damn it to hell. The sacrifices I have to make for this bank today. Edison Cheng, the pampered prince of private bankers, famous in Hong Kong society pages for his bon vivant lifestyle, his dapper wardrobe, his elegant wife Fiona, his photogenic children, and his superb lineage. His mother is Alexandra Young, of the Singapore Youngs, was unaccustomed to such inconveniences. 5 hours ago, he had been interrupted during a luncheon at the Hong Kong Club, rushed aboard the company jet bound for Beijing, and then hustled onto this flight to London. It had been years since he had suffered the indignity of flying commercial. But Mrs. Bao was on this godforsaken plane, and Mrs. Bao needed to be accommodated. But where exactly was the lady? Eddie expected to find her seated nearby, but the chief purser informed him there was no such person by that name in the cabin. No, she's supposed to be here. Can you check the flight manifest or something? Eddie demanded. Minutes later, Eddie found himself being led to row 37, seat E of the aircraft, economy class, where a petite woman in a white vicuña turtleneck and gray flannel slacks sat sandwiched between 2 passengers. Mrs. Bao? Bao Xiaoyan? Eddie inquired in Mandarin. The woman looked up and smiled wanly. Are you Mr. Cheng? Yes, so glad to meet you. I'm sorry we had to meet like this, Eddie smiled in relief. He had spent the past 8 years managing the Bao family's offshore accounts, but they were such a secretive lot, he had never met any of them until today. Even though she looked rather tired at the moment, Bao Xiaoyan was much prettier than he had imagined, with alabaster skin, large eyes that slanted upwards at the edges, and high cheekbones accentuated by the way she wore her jet black hair, pulled into a tight, low ponytail. She did not look old enough to have a son in grad school. "Why are you seated here? Was there some mix-up?" Eddie asked urgently. No, I always fly economy class," Mrs. Bao replied. Eddie couldn't hide his look of surprise. Mrs. Bao's husband, Bao Gaoliang, was one of Beijing's top politicians, and what's more, he had inherited one of China's biggest pharmaceutical firms. The Baos weren't just one of his regular clients, they were his ultra-high net worth clients. "Only my son flies first class," Bao Xiaoyan explained, catching Eddie's look. "Carlton can eat all the fancy Western food, and being a student under so much pressure, he needs all the rest he can get. But for me, it's not worth it. I don't touch airplane food, and I can never sleep on these long flights anyway." Eddie had to resist his urge to roll his eyes. Typical mainlanders. They lavished every penny on their little emperor and suffered in silence. Well, look where that got them. 23-year-old Carlton Bao was supposed to be at Cambridge finishing his master's dissertation, but had instead spent the previous evening doing his best Prince Harry impersonation, running up a 38,000-pound bar tab at half a dozen London night spots, wrecking his brand new Ferrari, destroying public property, and almost getting himself killed. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The worst of it, Eddie had been explicitly instructed not to reveal to Bao Xiaoyan. Eddie faced a conundrum. He urgently needed to go over the plans with Mrs. Bao, but he would sooner endure a colonoscopy than spend the next 11 hours slumming it in coach. God in heaven, what if someone recognized him? A picture of Edison Cheng crammed into an economy class seat will go viral within seconds. Yet, Eddie grudgingly realized that it would be unseemly for one of his bank's most important clients to remain here in steerage while he was up front, stretched out on a flatbed recliner, sipping 20-year-old cognac. He eyed the spiky-haired youth slouching dangerously close to Mrs. Bao on one side, and the elderly woman clipping her nails in the air sickness bag on her other side, a solution springing to mind. Lowering his voice, Eddie said, "Mrs. Bao, I would of course be happy to join you in this cabin, but there are some highly confidential matters we need to discuss. Would you allow me to arrange a seat for you up front?" "Well, I suppose if the bank insists," Bao Xiaoyan replied, a little hesitantly. After takeoff, when aperitifs had been served and they were both comfortably ensconced in the sumptuous pod-like seats facing each other, Eddie wasted no time updating his client. "Mrs. Bao, I was in contact with London just before boarding. Your son has been stabilized. The surgery to repair his punctured spleen was completely successful, and now the orthopedic team can take over." "Oh, thank all the gods," Bao Xiaoyan sighed, easing back into her seat for the first time. "We've already lined up the top reconstructive plastic surgeon in London, Dr. Peter Ashley, and he'll be in the operating room alongside the orthopedic team, attending to your son." "My poor boy," Bao Xiaoyan said, her eyes getting moist. "Your son was very lucky." "And the British girl?" "The girl is still in surgery, but I'm sure she will pull through just fine," Eddie said, putting on his peppiest smile. Barely 30 minutes earlier, Eddie had been on another airplane parked in a private hangar at Beijing Capital International Airport, taking in the grim details during a hastily arranged crisis management meeting with Mr. Tin, the gray-haired security chief for the Bao family, and Nigel Tomlinson, his bank's Asia chief. The two men had climbed aboard the Learjet as soon as it had landed, huddled over Nigel's laptop while an associate in London gave the latest update via a secure feed video conference. "Carlton is out of surgery now. He was quite a bit banged up, but being in the driver's seat with his airbag and everything, he actually suffered the least injuries. But with the English girl, it's touch and go. She's still in a coma, and they've relieved the swelling in the brain, but that's all they can do for now." "And the other girl?" Mr. Tin asked, squinting at the small pixelated pop-up window. We're told she died on impact." Nigel sighed. "And she was Chinese?" "We believe so, sir." Eddie shook his head. "What a mess. We need to track down the next of kin immediately before they are contacted by the authorities." "How do you even fit 3 people into a Ferrari?" Nigel asked. Mr. Tin twirled his phone nervously on the lacquered walnut console. Carlton Bao's father is on a state visit to Canada with the Premier of China, and nothing must interrupt him. My orders from Mrs. Bao are that no hint of a scandal must ever reach his ears. He must never know about the dead girl. Do you understand? There is too much at stake, given his political position, and it is especially sensitive with a big once-in-a-decade changeover in party leadership happening right now. Of course, Nigel assured him. We will say that the white girl was his girlfriend. And as far as the father is concerned, there was only one girl in the car. Why does Mr. Bao even need to know about the white girl? Don't worry, Mr. Tin. I've handled much worse dealing with some of those sheikhs' children in, Eddie boasted. Nigel shot Eddie a warning glare. The bank prided itself on utmost discretion, and here was his associate blabbing away about other clients. We have a tactical response team in London that I'm personally directing, and I can assure you we'll do everything to contain this, Nigel said, before turning to Eddie. How much do you think it will take to keep Fleet Street quiet? Eddie inhaled deeply, trying to do some quick calculations. It's not just the press, the policemen, the ambulance drivers, the hospital staff, the families. There's going to be an assload of people to shut up. I would suggest £10 million for starters. Well, the minute you land in London, you need to take Mrs. Bao straight to the office. We need her to sign off on a withdrawal before you take her to the hospital to see her son. I'm just wondering what we should say if Mr. Bao asks why we needed so much, Nigel pondered. Just say the girl needed some new organs, Mr. Tin suggested. We can also say we need to pay the boutique, Eddie added. Those Jimmy shoes are bloody pricey, you know. And that's basically how book 2 begins.
Yeah, that's great, because that leads exactly into my first question, which is, where do you draw inspiration for your characters and their antics from? Because I read about a 2012 Ferrari crash in Beijing involving 2 young women and the son of a high-level government official, which sounds very strangely similar to what you just read. So I was wondering if you're an avid reader of the local Asian press.
I really am. I get lots of Google alerts on what's happening in China. And really was my intention from the time I started the first books. I had always intended this to be a trilogy. Mm-hmm. And I knew it would start in Singapore, you know, in sort of this established Asian capital. But I really wanted to move the action in book 2 to China. You know, my original intention was to call the next book Crazier, Richer Asians. And so naturally you have to go to China and to, you know, the antics that are happening there right now and keep on happening.
Yeah, that's great. Because that leads right to another question I have, which is, okay, so...
This is being videoed, by the way, so...
Yes. So, I know you're working on that third book, and like you said, the first one took place in Singapore, and then it went to China to another level. What is that third, crazier level? Like, where can it go from there?
You will just have to see. But I really hope to explore yet another facet of Asia.
Okay.
And really sort of reveal, some hidden truths to that aspect of Asia.
Awesome, very cool. So I know that you come from a well-off Singaporean family yourself. So I was wondering, what prompted you to write the book and why now?
What prompted and why now? Really, it was because maybe starting, 5 or 6 years ago, I would really see all these headlines in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and various other magazines, Forbes magazine. It was all about the Asian miracle, the economic miracle, Asia's booming. So that would be one sort of trope of literature. And then there would be these other articles about the corruption of China or the crazy spending antics of the Asians. And I just felt it was such a unfair portrayal of what's actually a much more complex social, economic, issue that's unfolding on the other side of the world, that's sort of taking place. And so I really wanted to write this as a novel and really tell a more human story of what it's truly like to be living in Asia from a family of extreme wealth, and what it's like to not be from families of extreme wealth also. Because it's such an interesting confluence of events happening there.
Yeah, that definitely is interesting. And something else that I thought was really interesting is, of course, there's the difference between old money and new money, which we've seen since the day of like F. Scott Fitzgerald. But there's another layer that you add in your book between the younger generation of old money and the older generation of old money, like you see with Astrid and Edison's love for couture versus their moms who would stay 6 to a hotel room or 6 to an apartment room instead of paying for a hotel. So I was wondering if that's something that you're seeing now. Is it specific to China and specific to Asia, and what exactly was leading up to that?
It's something I've seen all my life, quite frankly, and I think it's a very typical human nature thing for, the first generation to make the money and the second generation to spend it, and the third generation to waste it all away, in a way. Yeah. But, especially in Asia and in China right now, the process of gentrification and the process of fortune making has been so accelerated. In Singapore and Hong Kong, it took families decades to build up fortunes. Sometimes whole generations before the next generation could benefit. But in China, we're seeing it happen at warp speed, where people are making overnight fortunes, billions of dollars over a decade. An interesting statistic that I just came across was that 10 years ago, there was not even a single billionaire in mainland China. And today, as of last week, there are 597 billionaires.
That's crazy.
They have more billionaires now than at Google, believe it or not. So, no, I mean, more than the United States, actually. So they've surpassed the US in billionaire creation in the last decade. And that's kind of crazy, So you see the spending and how it's changed the culture,
So I saw that President of China, Xi Jinping, spoke out this year advising the second generation rich in his country to think about the source of their wealth and how to behave after becoming affluent. And some local governments have taken steps to re-educate their wealthy elite. And in June, according to the Beijing Youth Daily, 70 heirs to major Chinese companies had to attend lectures on filial piety and the roles of traditional values in business.
They went to wealth concentration camp, basically, or wealth re-education camp. Yeah, which is interesting because, in the last few years, so much of their antics, they've been recording it on social media, and then it's been going viral. There are a few famous cases. I don't want to mention the names, but we all know about the guy who, Instagram a picture of his dog wearing 2 Apple watches, and, another case of a very famous media personality that was just sort of photographing piles of cash on a bed, it's been kind of crazy, and it's really beginning to sort of trickle down and really affect the general population of China, who do not have billions of dollars and who are angry at the entitlement that they see. And so I think the Chinese government really is taking this seriously in terms of this is the future, this is the new generation that's going to be taking over all these industries and businesses, and they need to kind of learn the ropes.
In their wealth concentration camps,
exactly.
Definitely. Are these kind of actions happening in Singapore, or is it very China specific?
It's very China specific because Singapore has a very sort of established old money sort of aristocracy that's existed for over 100 years. So they've learned, their own way over the decades how to manage their money, how to hide their money, how to show their money. And it's a very different mode of behavior than what's happening in China now.
Okay, that makes sense. And then speaking of the crazy antics in China, I know that you've had to tone down a lot of the antics for your book so it would be more believable. And I was wondering if you could indulge us in something that is real but you had to take out of your book, or just another real crazy situation.
So many things I had to change or take out because, to protect the identities of people and places I was able to sort of gain access to or invited to. So I can't be too specific about these instances, but let's just say that so much of what happens at this level is becoming much and much more hidden. You're seeing now these Chinese families moving into really safeguarding their privacy, not wanting to overtly show off what they have. So I was able, when I was last in China, to see some incredible residences, for example, how people live privately. So there's a new level of discretion, how people spend their money. It's becoming covert now, which is interesting. But it's unfathomable. They're spending in the way that the Vanderbilts were spending at the turn of the century, building gigantic sort of, pleasure palaces and commissioning planes from companies.
Yes, that's what I had to ask.
Gigantic planes.
Are there koi ponds in planes? Like, that blew my mind. Is that
the koi pond? I don't know. I've seen and heard of other planes with crazier stuff. So the koi pond was a really tame version of me being able to say something without identifying a plane.
Yeah.
Because there is this one plane, which I did see, which is so specific. And what they managed to accomplish on this plane was sort of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It might involve bowling. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How has your response been from your Asian audiences, and has that varied country to country?
I think uniformly there's been a great deal of excitement.
Yeah.
It's certainly been much more positive than I was anticipating it to be, because I do satirize this world. And but when I was on tour a few months ago in Hong Kong and the Philippines, the response was pretty much overwhelmingly positive. There's just so much excitement, I think, coming from that part of the world that the West is paying attention now, and that we're telling a story that's contemporary about what's really happening in Asia now, and portraying Asians in a positive light.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
Exactly, and in a different light than they're used to being seen in.
Exactly.
Yeah, I felt like a common motif in your book is how Westerners underestimate Asians, whether it's the opening scene in the London hotel in Crazy Rich Asians, where the families were discriminated against because of their race, or in China Rich Girlfriend, where the designers had only sent them runway looks specifically tailored to the Chinese market instead of collections that would be shown in New York or Paris. So I was wondering if this was a reflection of the general underestimation of Asians that you're seeing going on in the world now.
Definitely. I think, and it's being turned on its head. Because, for example, if you go to Europe now, even in New York, most of the people you see shopping at the top car dealerships, at the top jewelry stores, and on Madison Avenue, are distinctly Asian.
Yeah.
So the wealth equation has shifted, and spending, luxury spending, the Asian consumer now accounts for 70% of the global luxury market. So, all these companies have to very quickly had to sort of redo their strategies.
Yeah.
To respond to that.
Yeah, that is crazy. No, sorry.
It's no accident. Four of the top
exactly.
hotels in London are owned by Singaporeans.
Yeah. Makes sense. Oh, and then speaking of Singaporeans, I was wondering, because this is an area filled with Asians from so many different countries, how would you describe how different Singaporean culture is to others? I know you touched upon it a little bit before, but...
I think Singapore is interesting because it's always been this crossroads, since the 1800s. It was a port city. It was the sort of the deep water port in the Southeast Asia region. So it really was kind of the most multicultural city in Asia, I feel, with this Indian, Malay, Chinese, and European population just commingling and existing and supporting each other very well. And it's sort of advanced into the 21st century with this very multicultural city, and it's really created a dynamism that's very different than other cities in Asia, where, for example, Taiwan is very much a Chinese city. Hong Kong, there's a colonial British influence, but still overwhelmingly the population is Cantonese. Whereas in Singapore, you have all these groups and dialect groups of Chinese, mixing with Malays, with Indians, with Europeans. Now more than ever. So it's made it a very sort of cosmopolitan melting pot.
Got it. And that's definitely reflected in all the food you mentioned as well in the book. That makes sense.
It's the original foodie town.
Yeah, it was probably one of the most enjoyable parts of the books. So I wanted to talk about your upcoming movie. So I love this quote from you from June of this year in The Hollywood Reporter, and I quote, "It's so perplexing to see how casting in Hollywood is so defensive. I think audiences are much more accepting of casting choices. When Crazy Rich Asians came out, there was initial interest from a producer who wanted to change the heroine, Rachel Chu, into a white girl. I tell that story to book clubs in suburban middle America and they go crazy. Why does Hollywood think we want to see this movie with white people? They don't need every film to be chock full of the latest stars." So, now that you're further along in the film development process, I was wondering if you've run into any difficulties in casting an all-Asian cast, or if that's something that we're going to see.
We're not in the casting process yet, but I can tell you that the producers, the financiers, everyone involved is so excited to really cast like a pan-Asian dream team of actors, from North America, from all over Asia, to really reflect the diversity of characters in my book. And there hasn't been even a suggestion that anyone's not going to be Asian. The book is called Crazy Rich Asians. And I think not just Hollywood, but everyone in Asia is so fascinated by this because it's the first time it's happening. And so everyone has skin in the game. They're all wanting to see what happens, who's cast.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, tremendous pressure for Hollywood to do this right and to really represent this right in a way that I think has never happened before.
Yeah, exactly.
But definitely I think Hollywood has made a lot of very defensive moves with their casting choices in the past few years. Like with Aloha, the Cameron Crowe movie, where a Hawaiian Chinese character turned out to be Emma Stone.
Yeah.
And Hollywood didn't used to be like this. If you think back to the 50s, the 60s, with really vanguard actors, Hispanic, Chinese, Egyptian, Omar Sharif to Nancy Kwan, they made stars, and people would go and see these movies. And now all they want to do is cast people that are already bankable box office hits, and it's kind of very much like an ostrich in the sand mentality, I think, when audiences really want to see new people.
Yeah.
And they want to see these new stories.
Yeah, definitely.
Not everything can be a Marvel comic, reenactment.
Yeah, sequel,
so,
yeah. So speaking of audiences, who do you see as your audience for this new movie that's coming up?
We're really trying to target this to a global audience.
Yeah.
Because I've seen with my books, my book has been translated into 12 languages internationally.
Wow.
The Hebrew edition just came out. And everywhere I go, I meet readers who are like, oh my God, you need to do Crazy Rich Pakistanis.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm from Israel, but my family is just like this. You need to do Crazy Cheap Jews, things like that. So everyone has found a way to sort of relate to the characters.
Yeah.
And so why wouldn't they want to see this movie about these crazy rich Asians,
Yeah.
So we don't have one demographic in mind. We're hoping to make everyone happy.
Yeah, very cool. So what are you hoping the audiences will take away from this movie then?
I hope they'll just laugh and have a good time, but also really see the multidimensionality of Asians and what's happening in Asia right now. That it's not just all war-torn countries and desperate people, having to give away their babies, things like that. There's a new narrative, and these stories can now be told, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, I've heard your books compared a lot to either Jane Austen novels or maybe even Gossip Girl series. So I was wondering, would you compare them to that? And what were your literary inspirations for this?
It's interesting. Jane Austen is one of my favorite writers, and I do like a lot of these writers like Edith Wharton and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Dominic Dunn and people that were writing about these circles of privilege. I think since the beginning of writing, since the beginning of literature, general public has always been fascinated by the foibles of the very rich. Machiavelli wrote The Prince. Yeah. And then from then on, it's been Trollope and Jane Austen. It always has been concerning people of power and privilege. And now that the power and privilege has sort of shifted to Asia, this is the new crowd. These are the new Elizabeth Bennets of the world. Yeah.
Your book has been well received by everyone, regardless, or by many different audiences, regardless of the background. So were there parts that you saw maybe non-Asian audiences weren't understanding as well, or was it something that everyone could relate to?
I really tried to make the story as universal as possible, and I wasn't trying to write for an Asian specific audience. If anything, I was just trying to write for like a mass American audience, really. And I have lots of footnotes just to sort of add more detail to some of the cultural nuances of the stories and things like that. So hopefully it's something that's enjoyed and understandable by everyone. I did notice, though, touring in Asia, I was in the Philippines for a couple of weeks, and the Filipinos, I think, are like my super fans. I'd never seen this many people turn out for readings and screaming women, and I now know how Justin Bieber feels. But I realized something interesting was that they're a very westernized Asian culture. They're part of Asia. They get all the Asian jokes, but they are also very Americanized, having been American territory. So they're getting all the jokes in every level, which I think has made them appreciate the book on a much deeper level. And I hope that in book 3 I can really achieve that so that everyone can sort of enjoy it, not just the Filipinos.
How has the reaction been from your Chinese audiences or your Singapore audiences where a lot of the book does take place in?
From what I've heard, they've been, thrilled. The book's done really well in Singapore, and the Singaporeans I hear from who like the book, are very happy about it. There might be some people who have been not as happy.
Yeah,
by the
they probably
portrayal,
don't tell you.
But they don't say anything.
Yeah,
They're too polite.
exactly.
So hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah.
But it's been generally extremely positive.
That's great. What audience reaction has surprised you the most?
Actually, from Asian Americans. And Asians living in Western countries,
Yeah.
Asian Canadians, Asian Australians. I don't think Asian Americans were the first people to actually read the book. I think there was some skepticism at first. You know,
Yeah.
if you're confronted by a book called Crazy Rich Asians, you kind of tend to go, what's this all about?
Yeah, it did take me a while
yeah.
to pick up the book, I'm not
See?
gonna lie, yeah.
But you know, after it sort of entered into mainstream media, and more people started talking about it, I think a lot of, you know, the audience shifted, and more I began seeing and interacting with much more Asian American audiences. And for them, there's been kind of a profound reaction from some people. They've told me how it's the first time they've seen themselves portrayed in such an honest, contemporary way, you know, without all the issues of previous generations, you know. So they
Yeah.
feel very kind of inspired to read about characters who are empowered, sexy, attractive, you know, normal people.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
just happen to be Asian.
Exactly,
you know?
yeah.
So that's been a really lovely sort of fringe benefit, which I never expected.
I find as I'm reading your book, my head is spinning with all the inter-family webs of who's involved with who and how they know each other. And so did you build these family trees first and how they would interweave and interact with each other, or did that come as you were writing? I
really built it first. You know, I already had an idea of this sort of very complex structure of intermarried families, and the family tree I think was the first thing I did. And then I said, okay, this chapter I'm just going to tell this story, this chapter I'm going to tell that story, and in that way I slowly kind of put together a jigsaw puzzle. But it did start with the family that, you know, is in the first page of Crazy Rich Asians. Thanks for asking the question.
I had a question, or I liked your comment earlier about how you felt like things like the Wall Street Journal or New York Times were unfairly portraying, you know, these antics of rich young Asians. And so one thing I was wondering was, what do you think, what's like the human side of these, you know, wealthy scions of mainlanders? What are their particular struggles that are different from what we've seen from other generations of rich people in general?
I think that because for so many of them, these cities and the way of life has changed so completely just in the last 10 years, you know, they're sort of struggling to find themselves in this hyper-modern world, first of all. So I think there's a lot of disorientation. There's been a lot of displacement from families, you know, being moved from rural areas, small towns, small villages into the big cities. And so they're all having to adapt to living together multi-generationally in these mega cities, number one. And then number two, specifically for the privileged set of people, a lot of them are being educated in the West. In fact, that's kind of the goal for every sort of well-to-do Chinese family, starting from middle class on up. It's like you want to send your kids to Harvard, you know, or Yale, and these kids are getting Western educations, and then they're having to go back and confront the reality of China, and you know, the traditions and the cultures and the expectations of their parents, of their grandparents, and there's a huge disconnect between, you know, their new dreams and aspirations and what their country and their society expects of them.
I'm curious what you were doing before you wrote these books, and if you kind of touched on the fact that the news cycle inspired you to write this, but had you always planned to be a novelist? Were you a novelist? Do you have other books that I haven't been made aware of? Just curious, your journey.
Thank you. I was not a novelist until 3 years ago. My first degree was in media studies, actually, at the University of Houston. And so I always had this dream after graduating with this sort of communications-focused degree to then get a design and visual side of the degree, so I could meld those two and become sort of like this double threat in this whole new world of the internet and the World Wide Web and going into new media. So that was originally my intention. But you know, life changes and it takes you along different ways. So I went to design school, art school after my first degree, and found myself working for a very influential design firm in New York afterwards, M & Company. And from there, sort of getting drawn into being a consultant to a lot of different media companies. So I've worked for Hearst, I've worked for Condé Nast, I've worked for design firms, architectural firms, I was part of helping TED.com relaunch their website in 2008, I think. So I had this whole other side in sort of design consulting. So it wasn't until 2010 that I decided that I wanted to really write a book like this, and just kind of went for it. Never expecting it would lead to this. It's just something I was doing as a hobby.
I'm wondering, in regards to your movie, do you plan on sitting on the dailies? Do you ask for partial cast approval? How much creative control did you relinquish?
I'm an executive producer of the movie, so I'm as involved as I want to be, but I also recognize that I'm not the expert here. And I've put my trust in this incredible team led by Nina Jacobson at Color Force, and she's had an amazing track record of making great books into great movies. And every author that she's worked with has so far been really happy with her. So I'm trying to really kind of let that movie team have the freedom to sort of create this without being, that control freak author. Because at the end of the day, I realized a movie is very different from the book. It will never be the book. First of all, it's going to be hour 45 minutes. You can't tell my story in that length of time. But hopefully, if it captures the DNA of the book, and it's a fun ride for people, that's my primary concern. So will I be sitting on set? I don't know. I haven't. We'll cross that bridge when we need to. But I'm really sort of focused on letting this movie be what it wants to be.
I was really curious about all the details that you had about fashion, and I have to admit it's kind of over my head, but how did you do the research for that? And you also mentioned talking with people and keeping their identities, but at the same time, are they cool with you giving a lot of these cool details about them?
I think, first of all, in most cases, I've changed the stories and the scenarios and the details enough to where no one's recognizable. And number two, there's nothing malicious about what I write about, so hopefully people aren't too upset, even if they're semi-recognizable. And then to answer the first question, as a creative and design consultant, it was kind of my business to kind of do trend forecasting, to be sort of ahead of the curve on fashion trends, design trends, things like that. So that really was a natural part of bringing my experience into writing that novel.
Speaking of fashion and airlines and everything, are you being approached by any big luxury brands about a movie or the next book or anything about hey, you should feature me because I'm this awesome brand that represents what you're writing about?
I haven't, and I don't think I'd ever do that because I like having this editorial independence to really kind of craft the world I want to craft and have the characters wear what I think they should wear versus having Chanel endorse everything, even though they're in the book like 8 million times because the women wear Chanel, you know what I mean? But it's an interesting thought, but it's not something I don't think I'd ever want to be part of that, for now at least. Yeah. Movie might be a different thing, but that's for the movie people.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you say perfect, because to me, I think Astrid is such an interesting, tragic character. She has the beauty, she has the style, she has the breeding, she has everything in the world except happiness, And Nick keeps getting into trouble with his mother and his grandmother and all the, various crazies around him.
Yeah.
So,
I always thought that Rachel's portrayal was also very perfect. Or every time anyone described her, they're like, she's so beautiful and perfect and funny and smart and nice. And so, that was just my takeaway.
So maybe in book 3, I have to make her really trip up much more. Yeah. Well, she had a lot of blind spots too.
That's true.
Wouldn't you say? Yeah.
So how would you say the reception has been for your second book compared to your first book?
It's been enormously positive. I think the reviews for the second book actually, for the most part, have been even better than the first book. And I hear from different readers that they say, oh, we love the first book more. But I also hear equally from other readers that say, oh, I love the second book so much more. So it's been, very evenly mixed. I think a lot of people, because of the first book was to them so different, there's always a little more affection for the first book than for the second. The second's less novel. I don't know. What do you think?
I find this with all series of books that it's hard to pick one because they're all part of a larger story. Like, I always use Harry Potter as an example.
Yeah.
Like, I love every single book, but they build upon one another, so you can't really take one out of the equation as much.
Thank you.
For me.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping with the third book to add yet another level of dimensionality that sort of that contextualizes book one and book two.
Exactly.
And people will finally understand why I did what I did, instead of just, being angry. There are not many angry people, but there are a few that would nitpick. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's like, well, there's a method to the madness. You'll see.
Yeah, exactly. In the end.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I've met a lot of readers who started with the second book and have just enjoyed it equally. I can't imagine how, having read it, because it really starts, it's like a cliffhanger and then book two begins. But, so that's how I would recommend you read it. It'll be a much more rich experience for you that way.
Yeah, because then you know the characters better. Like, as soon as you said Edison Chang, I was like, haha, because, I know him from the first book, and you just know how ridiculous he is.
And so many people would tweet me, or they would just say, oh my God, the minute he came on page one and said the famous words he says, which I censored for you to, people would start laughing, the minute he utters his trademark swear word.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And same thing with Kitty Pong. Like, as soon as she enters, you're like, yes, she's back.
So I absolutely love the series, and I was wondering when I will no longer have to wait for the third book and for the movie. Do you have any sense of when those will come out?
I'm really, don't hold me to it, but I'm really hoping 2017. Because I have to write the third book now. And I'm still on tour, so I'm really hoping after this is really the end of my tour, to really buckle down, write book 3, and get it out as I really want this to be over with too as soon as possible.
Do you have people suggesting crazy things to you, in book 3 you should do this?
All the time. You have no idea. On social media, people send me stories. People try to cast themselves in the next book. This Indonesian tycoon sent me videos of his daughter's Sweet 16 birthday party. They spent $10 million on her Sweet 16. It was out of control, and he's like, you should feature this in the next book. It's legally, I can't feature anything that anyone sent to me,
Yeah.
So.
Okay, what was one idea where you heard it and you're like, this is so, this is never going to be in the book?
Oh, you put me on the spot. I really can't think of anything offhand. There have been so many crazy suggestions of what to do, what not to do, but I just try to filter that out and be true to the story I always wanted to write.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good point.
So was there an idea that you wish you could have put in the book? Something that somebody sent you, go, wow, this is absolutely crazy.
It's interesting because there's in book 2 there's a racing sequence. I don't know if you've read the books yet, but there's it's now become a hobby of the crazy rich Chinese to have these drag races. They don't do it in China because they don't want to be caught in China, so they do it around the world. They meet up in California or Sydney, they bring in their exotic cars, and they do these drag races. And so I'd really structured a whole couple of chapters around one of these pivotal scenes, and my editor was like, no way. She's like, no one's gonna believe it. I'm like, but it's really happening. I can show you the headlines, I can show you the pictures, but she's like, it's just, there are things that are, you don't want to lose the reader in the momentum of the story. So I had to take out most of that scene, which maybe will find its way into movie too. I don't know. So there are certain scenes I wish I could keep, but for the sake of believability, was told that it was better to cut. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you guys.